Chairman, I wish to declare that I work at a research-oriented institution of higher learning. In 2017, our national expenditure on research and expenditure as a share of national output amounted to a little shy of 2%. This amount is actually below the global average of 2.3%. And perhaps more tellingly, for a nation that seeks to be a knowledge-based economy, it is also significantly below the amounts that other technology-seeking economies have devoted. The United States, for example, spends 2.8%, Japan 3.2%, Korea 4.6%, and Israel 4.8%, excuse me. Our companies are also decidedly old economy. Singapore has few firms for which intangible assets make up the majority of the balance sheet. Even one of the top Singapore-based internet and e-commerce firms, C Limited, reports that only about 1% of its assets are intangible. There is solid evidence that R&D investment can improve and be a boost to productivity via its catalytic effects on innovation. The need to boost productivity is especially pertinent in light of Singapore's poor productivity performance and the fact that has been corroborated study after study. It can also pay for itself, since heightened productivity will itself grow out our GDP pie. Increases in national expenditure, appropriately directed for R&D, is therefore an evidently attractive avenue for not just boosting productivity and thereby growth, but also helping companies and our people stay at the forefront of advances in the digital economy and artificial intelligence revolution, green technologies, modern manufacturing, and biotech innovations. Civil servants responsible for disbursing grant support for firms confidentially share that they often face difficulty in identifying and allocating grant financing. They add that local businesses remain reluctant to fully embrace R&D, even where financial support is available. It is critical that we convince as many local firms as possible, especially those in the SME sector, that their continued success hinges on cultivating and embedding an innovative mindset. Just as pertinent, we have to be sensitive to the transition process and channel R&D funds away from certain industries that our economy has traditionally relied on, such as petrochemicals, wholesale trading, or back office finance, that we deem to be inconsistent with our 21st century economic model. Instead, we can redirect R&D grants and subsidies toward the sunrise industries that the government has already identified. Finally, I would caution this House of that our notion of sectors deemed worthy of R&D financing for innovation need not be wedded to solely high-tech industries, such as innovation in communications technology or biopharmaceuticals, but also much more traditional goods and services. The vast majority of our government grants via A-STAR or IMDA, even when not explicitly earmarked for technology startups, are still heavily directed towards supporting business digitalization. While important, innovation may occur in unexpected ways. For example, we can look at the continued refinement of modern Singapore cuisine, developing new techniques for sustainable landscaping and energy-efficient building design, pioneering new elderly care methodologies, or identifying new tools to support advanced manufacturing, as Minister Leng has already emphasized. More generally, candidate projects with the highest probability of success are seldom best identified via tightly defined conditions, which speaks to the need for us to be more accommodating in our assessment methods and more liberal in our qualification criteria for government R&D grants. Under what conditions will MTI be willing to target an increase in R&D expenditures to bring us closer to the spending for technology-driven economies? This amount, to be funded from public and private sources, would ostensibly be directed toward a broad range of innovative activity across the economy, and especially in assisting SMEs with innovative activity.
Associate Professor Jamus Lim spoke about increasing R&D spending. The government is committed to investing about 1% of our GDP in research, innovation, and enterprise over the next 5 years. And this is similar to our commitment for RIE 2020 and our earlier research plans. Our investments in RIE is comparable is at a comparable level to other small advanced economies. And unlike what Associate Professor Jamus Lim alluded to earlier, we're by no means far behind. Compared to the more mature advanced economies, our RIE ecosystem is still at a relatively early stage of development. But notwithstanding that, in absolute terms, we have increased our investments in RIE significantly since our first National Technology Plan in 1991. In fact, if you look at, just for reference sake, Singapore's public expenditure on R&D was about 0.7% of GDP in 2018, compared to 1.1% for Denmark, 1% for Sweden, and Switzerland. So, I think we need to compare on a like-for-like. This kind of investments are significant for a small country like us. It is not just about increasing public investments into R&D, but it's about making very judicious investment, about spending the money wisely, about continuing to develop the capabilities that's needed for us to meet our national strategic needs and to create new growth opportunities for ourselves. And in the past 20 to 30 years, we have made collectively as a country significant strides. My exhortation is to everyone who's in this house, we cannot rush this.
I will just point out two things. One is that while I appreciate that the government has shared that Singapore spends a comparable amount in public expenditure on R&D to countries like Sweden, I should note that the figures I cited were actually for national R&D, which includes spending from private sources. And this is not in dispute. I think it's from a source with reliable provenance. So I wonder whether the government will be willing to share its strategy for perhaps catalyzing greater R&D spending by the private sector.
Indeed, it's very true. The government cannot always be the one to decide which area of R&D spending that we want to do. Of course, there are areas of basic sciences that we will need to invest because there are very little commercial opportunities at that stage of development. But at the later stages of R&D development or for research and innovation, we will want to crowd in, as Minister Tan See Leng said, we would like to crowd in more private investment in this. And that's why there are different schemes for different parts of the R&D chain. Upstream for basic science and technology, most of the funding will come generally more from the government sources. But as we go downstream towards the innovation and commercialization possibilities, we would like to crowd in more of this. That is why, as a strategy, as we go downstream, our funding of many of these initiatives would like to have a funding component that sees the private sector participation. The ARTC is an Advanced Remanufacturing Center is a good example. All the companies put skin in the game, and the government chips in our part as well. This is how we crowd in the thing. The companies come together to define the R&D outcomes that they would like to see, and they will also share the outcomes or the outputs that can be derived from the research effort. So this is the kind of effort that we would like to encourage our private sector to work with the government, especially in the downstream translational the translation into commercial opportunities. So it is not the same type of strategies across the entire different parts of the R&D chain. It is also not the same type of strategy for different types of R&D, ranging from biomed to deep tech to other e-commerce opportunities.